A legal win with a bonus Bob Dylan quote for a Democratic senator over the defense secretary. That's because the judge is now blocking the Pentagon's push to demote Senator Mark Kelly and dock his retirement pay. He's a retired naval officer because of what Kelly said in a video to members of the military. This is the video from a while back. The White House calls seditious, as in traitorous, as in punishable, when several lawmakers put out this reminder to troops.
Hey guys, Adam is here again. Let me tell you something that should absolutely shock the conscience of every single American who still believes in democratic accountability. The United States Senate, the most powerful legislative body on the planet, demanded that Donald Trump sit down, face them directly, and give immediate answers about his conduct, his decisions, and his fitness to continue serving as president. And what did Trump do when faced with that demand? He walked out. He literally got up, called the whole thing a disgrace, and stormed out of the room like a child who got told he couldn't have dessert before dinner. The President of the United States, the man who was supposed to be accountable to the American people and to their elected representatives.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
Now, the judge says the Trump administration trampled on Kelly's First Amendment rights, quoting Dylan to write, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." A different tune from Secretary Pete Hegseth promising to appeal. You see it there. And it's all on the heels of a pretty extraordinary development that NBC News scooped when a grand jury rejected indicting Kelly and the 5 other Democrats in that video, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter. Let me bring in our Ryan Riley, who's been the tip of the spear on that reporting. And Ryan, let's start this showdown between Hegseth and Kelly here. The judge was pretty definitive in giving Kelly what is clearly a legal win for him, although, as Pete Hegseth points out, it's not over yet.
Yeah, this is going to be appealed. But what the judge said initially is that he hopes this is a shot across the bow, a warning sign that this is not the way that the administration should continue. Because in his view, and I think the view of most legals,
was asked to provide answers about serious constitutional concerns. And instead of standing there like a leader and facing the music, he turned his back on the United States Senate and walked away.
That's right. So one of them was a 34-year prosecutor. He worked under Judge Jeanine when she was a local prosecutor up in New York. The other person, though, is someone who's been a Hill staffer for years, a Republican Hill staffer. He was on the Benghazi committee. He just worked for every oversight Republican going back 10 years. Jim Jordan he worked for. And so it's kind of a pretty clearly partisan figure who was put into this spot. And that's just not normally how this case would move forward. You would normally have a career federal prosecutor on this sort of case. But if any career federal prosecutor were to look at this, the First Amendment considerations are just like really big red flags here. If you would normal process at DOJ, they would say you can't really bring this forward because there's clear First Amendment protected free speech here.
It's staring you right in the face would be there for you, potentially.
Exactly.
Ryan Riley, thank you very much. Good to see you.
The reaction in that chamber was stunned silence, followed by an eruption of outrage that is still reverberating through the halls of Congress as we speak. This is not normal. This is not how a president behaves in a functioning democracy. And the fact that we are even talking about a president of the United States literally walking out on the Senate tells you just how far off the rails things have gone. Now, I want to be completely transparent with you, because that is something I always try to do. Some of what you are seeing online right now about this confrontation includes dramatized or fictional elements. Some of those videos explicitly state in their descriptions that they contain analysis, opinions, and dramatized elements based on publicly available reports. Others say outright that the content is fictional and not intended to represent real events. I want to be upfront about that because I never want to present fiction as confirmed hard news. But here is the thing you need to understand. The reason these scenarios hit so hard, the reason they resonate with millions of viewers, the reason they feel so real is because the underlying political reality they are built on is 100% genuine. Congress really is demanding answers from this administration on multiple fronts right now. Senators really are grilling officials about Trump's most controversial decisions in intense hearings. Impeachment resolutions really have been introduced accusing Trump of defying Supreme Court rulings, encouraging false statements by officials, and violating his oath of office. The oversight pressure is real and it is growing. The constitutional concerns are real and they are deepening. The institutional confrontation between the executive and legislative branches is real, and it is intensifying with every passing week. Think about what has been happening just in the past several months. Congress has demanded answers about the abrupt firing of the head of the National Security Agency, a move that blindsided the intelligence community and raised urgent questions about whether national security was being compromised for political reasons. Senators have demanded testimony about security failures at Trump's own rally events, where breakdowns in protection protocols put lives at risk. And there has been a growing drumbeat of oversight focused on Trump's executive orders pushing constitutional boundaries, his emergency declarations bypassing congressional spending power, and his dismissal of inspectors general whose entire job is to hold the executive branch accountable. Each one of these oversight actions is significant on its own. But when you look at them all together, you see why the dramatized scenario of a direct Senate confrontation resonates so powerfully. The pressure really is building from every direction. The central issue that has brought this conflict to a boiling point is the question of whether the president is subject to congressional oversight or whether he can simply refuse to participate whenever he finds it inconvenient. That sounds like a question with an obvious answer. Of course, the president is subject to congressional oversight. That is literally how the Constitution is designed to work. But what we are seeing under this administration is a systematic effort to treat congressional oversight as optional rather than mandatory. When Congress issues subpoenas, the White House tells officials not to comply. When Senate committees schedule hearings, the officials who should testify either don't show up or show up and refuse to answer questions. When lawmakers demand documents, the administration invokes executive privilege so broadly that it effectively turns every piece of paper into a state secret. And when senators try to get direct answers from the president himself, according to the most dramatic version of this story, he literally gets up and walks out rather than face their questions. Let me talk about the impeachment resolutions connected to all of this because they tell you just how seriously some members of Congress are taking this confrontation. House Resolution 415 is particularly significant. This resolution accuses Trump of defying Supreme Court rulings, not disagreeing with them, not criticizing them, but actively defying them by refusing to comply with judicial orders that conflict with his policy agenda. Think about what that means. The whole structure of American government is built on the idea that the three branches each have defined powers and each serve as a check on the others. When the Supreme Court issues a ruling, that ruling is the law of the land, and the president is constitutionally obligated to respect it. A president who refuses to comply with court orders is essentially saying he is above the judiciary, that his power has no limits, and that the system of checks and balances does not apply to him. That is exactly the kind of behavior the framers designed impeachment to address. Resolution 415 goes even further. It also accuses Trump of encouraging false statements by senior officials, alleging that the president has directed the people who work for him to lie to the public, to lie to Congress, and to lie to the courts about what the administration is doing. Combine that with defiance of Supreme Court rulings, and you get a picture of a presidency operating outside constitutional authority in ways that are not just concerning but potentially criminal. This brings me to the 25th Amendment, which some of the dramatized versions of this story reference. The 25th Amendment provides a mechanism for removing a president unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. While traditionally understood as applying to physical or mental incapacity, some legal scholars have raised the provocative question of whether a president who systematically refuses to fulfill his constitutional obligations could be considered unable to discharge his duties in a broader sense. The fact that it is even being discussed that serious constitutional scholars are openly debating whether the 25th Amendment could apply to a president who walks out on accountability tells you everything about how unprecedented this situation is. We are in territory no previous generation has ever navigated, and the constitutional tools we have were not designed for a president who actively refuses to be part of the democratic process that is supposed to hold him accountable. I also want to talk about the symbolic power of the walkout and what it communicates to the rest of the world. When the president walks out on the Senate, that is not just a domestic political event. That is an international signal. It tells every foreign government that the American president does not respect his own legislative branch, does not feel bound by democratic governance, and is willing to publicly humiliate the institution that is supposed to check his power. For our adversaries, countries like Russia and China, that signal is incredibly valuable because it confirms what they have been arguing for years, that American democracy is dysfunctional, that American institutions are weak, and that the American system is no better than their own authoritarian models. Every time Trump attacks Congress, every time he dismisses oversight, every time he walks away from accountability, he hands our adversaries a propaganda victory they could never have manufactured on their own. So what does this mean going forward? The most important thing to understand is that regardless of whether the most dramatic walkout scenario played out exactly as sensationalized, the underlying constitutional crisis is real. It is deepening, and it is not going to resolve itself. We have a president who has demonstrated that he does not believe he is subject to congressional oversight. We have a Congress increasingly united in its insistence that oversight is not optional and that the president must be held accountable. And we have impeachment resolutions, investigative findings, and legal opinions saying the president has crossed constitutional lines that previous presidents always respected. That collision between a president who refuses accountability and a Congress that demands it is the defining political conflict of our time. How it resolves will determine whether the American system of government as we have known it continues to function or whether it fundamentally breaks down. The most immediate consequence is that this confrontation has hardened battle lines between the White House and Capitol Hill in ways that will make it extremely difficult for anything productive to get done legislatively. When a president walks out on the Senate, he is declaring war on the concept of legislative oversight. Senators who might have worked with the administration on bipartisan legislation will think twice about extending goodwill to a president who shows such contempt for their institution. Committee chairs conducting oversight will feel pressure to escalate investigations. The American public will demand their representatives take a stand. There is no more middle ground. The walkout, real or dramatized, has eliminated the possibility of a quiet behind-the-scenes resolution. Everything is out in the open now, and everybody is going to have to pick a side. The system of checks and balances only works if all three branches participate voluntarily and in good faith. The Constitution does not have an enforcement mechanism for a president who simply refuses to cooperate. There is no constitutional police force that can march into the White House and compel the president to answer the Senate's questions. The whole system depends on norms, traditions, and a shared commitment to the principle that power must be balanced and accountability maintained. What Trump has done through his stonewalling, his defiance, his attacks on oversight, and the symbolic act of walking out is demonstrate that those norms are far more fragile than most Americans ever realized. He has shown that a president willing to ignore the rules can get away with an enormous amount simply by refusing to play the game the way it has always been played. That revelation, that the guardrails of American democracy are made of norms rather than steel, is perhaps the most important lesson of this entire era. This confrontation is not a one-time event. It is the beginning of an escalating cycle that will define the rest of Trump's presidency. Every time Trump refuses to cooperate, Congress pushes harder. Every time Congress pushes harder, Trump resists more aggressively. Every time Trump resists, calls for impeachment grow louder. And every time those calls grow, Trump digs in deeper and portrays himself as a victim. That cycle of resistance, escalation, entrenchment is the political dynamic that will dominate American governance. Breaking out of it would require concessions neither side appears willing to make. Trump will not suddenly start cooperating after years of treating oversight as illegitimate. Congress will not stop demanding accountability just because the president finds it annoying. So we are stuck in this cycle. The only question is how far it escalates before something fundamental gives way. Whether that is Trump's grip on power, Congress's willingness to push all the way to removal, or the American public's patience with a government more interested in fighting itself than solving problems. This is the reality of American politics right now. Whether the most dramatic version of the walkout is fiction or fact, the crisis it represents is absolutely real. The question is not whether there will be more confrontations. There will be. The question is whether the system of checks and balances is strong enough to survive them. Stay tuned because what happens next is going to be absolutely critical.